All right. Hi, I am Dr. James Benjamin here. In case you weren't able to make it to the class today, here is a chance to see what we did. This is going to be the first of two recordings because of how I'm having to record this. But it'll be very much the same process each time. Now, the first problem that we went through was actually a sort of circadian rhythm sort of problem. As you know, we're all in a 24-hour sleep-wake cycle, and that's because of some cues in our environment that keep us on that 24-hour cycle. And there's always been a question, or at least there was a question back in the mid-20th century, as to whether or not that was really how things went. So there were some thoughts that we might be on a faster cycle naturally if we didn't have cues, or slower um, responses or cycles if we didn't have those cues available. So one way of doing that would be to put people into, like, say, a sort of underground basement type apartment setting, no windows, no time devices of any sort, no watches, clocks, cell phones, TVs, you name it, no way to see any changes in daylight, etc. Um, you have all the other amenities of life, of course, because those are important, being able to have food and all that other good stuff you want to have happen, right? So make sure that those are available. That's all well and good. Now, to actually test the hypothesis, what you do is you are going to run a one sample t-test. And what I do is actually fairly straightforward. Um, I go ahead and I set everything up that I want. I'm going to want effect size. We're going to keep the default students t-test. Um, we're going to change the test value to 24, and that's to deal with the fact that we're going to have 24 hours that we're testing against. So whatever the mean that we get in this sample, which will probably be different from 24, we need to compare it to 24 to see if it's noticeably different enough to say it's statistically significant. Then we're going to go and make sure we get our descriptive statistics, and we want to check for the assumption of normality. Okay, so that's something we'll need to do. All right, so got all of those in place, and what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and click this variable here, cycle. It's the only one we can highlight right now. Move it over to dependent variable. And in just a second, you're going to see everything populate. Okay. And of course, if you look at the descriptives, there were 8 in the sample. Their mean was 25. You can see that the standard deviation and standard error look like they're relatively low, which is actually a comforting sign. Normality, what you look for with normality is the p-value. In particular, you want to make sure that that p-value is not too low. If you start getting a p's approaching 0.05, then you really do have to worry about whether or not your distribution was a normally shaped distribution. Or if it violates normality so much that you actually have to simply forget about running a t-test and maybe running a Wilcoxon rank test instead. Okay. You can see the t-statistic is 2.37. There's 7 degrees of freedom. You remember how we got 7 degrees of freedom. One score is held constant. The other 7 are free to vary. The p just barely makes the mark for being statistically significant. So we'll say that our sample seemed to be different from the 24-hour cycle. They tended to be a bit on the higher side at 25 hours. The effect size is a strong effect size. It's almost 0.84. Okay, and if you remember what we learned about effect size last week, then this should not be a problem for you. You'll remember that. But this is really all I did. The one thing that I couldn't do, because we really just need to update our Jamovi software, is I couldn't add some new modules. So one of the things I want to show you real fast before I stop this video is what the R code would look like. And so let me see if I can do that. Used to know how to syntax mode. That's what I want. Okay, so there we go. And this is what it would look like if you actually ran this in R. It would be a lot uglier, but it would essentially be about the same thing. Okay, and on that note, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Remember to save and remember to submit. The next one is coming up in just a second.